Thank you, and good morning. That was nice. My name is Beth Andes, and I'm a member of this church, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here today on this beautiful, beautiful summer day. One of my lovely duties and pleasures is to greet visitors. So if there are any visitors today who would like us to know who you are, please stand and tell us your name and where you're from so that we can say hello. Welcome. 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 Awesome. Welcome. Yes, sir. Welcome.
I'm Hannah Kelm with my husband Steven, and we brought my mom Jennifer and my brother Hayden today.
Welcome. And if you're not willing to stand up and say your name, you're also welcome. So two guests on the piano we have, and I hope you will join me in greeting him, Michaelis Koutsoupides. And our guest minister hardly needs an introduction to many of us, but for those who are newer members, I'd like to introduce Jim Eller. And then one final thing, which is today we have a visitor orientation. So if you are a visitor and would like to learn more about the church, there's a brief meeting after the church. Just meet at the visitors table and they will take you there. Good morning.
It is good to be back with you. What a joy it is to be here in Kansas City and at All Souls. I share these words by Naomi King. Do any of you know who Naomi King is? The name may have a familiar ring. She's not related to Martin Luther King. She's not related to Dick King, formerly a member of our church. She is related to Stephen King, the author, who is well known to many of us. She is a Unitarian Universalist minister, and it's her vision of our faith that I share with you. We are a rainbow people. We are a rainbow people. The rainbow is an arc of light brilliantly displaying all the colors of the visible spectrum, all the colors that combine to make the astounding beauty of our world, all the colors that combine to reflect the astounding diversity of human expression. We are red people who respect others. We are orange people who offer faith and kind treatment. We are yellow people yearning for learning. We are green people who grow in our search for truth and meaning. We are blue people who believe that we are able to achieve and to search. We are indigo people who insist on freedom, love, and peace. We are violet people valuing the world that does not cease, the web that does not cease, nor did we create it. Unitarian Universalism shows up refracted through thousands of different human experiences and expressions, through individual lives, our promises, through covenant and community, through our association and our actions. We are a rainbow people. Together, what we give heals and transforms our world, and this is our covenant. Our bridge of heaven, our dream, our reality, the flame of our chalice lit around the world is the source of light, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The flame of our chalice is filled with the light we bring and nurtured by our hopes and dreams. We know the rainbow begins with you and me. We are the rainbow people and gathered here in the celebration of our diversity and the light we share and bring.
Good morning. My name is Evan, and I light this chalice for respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part.
Thank you, Evan. And now would you rise as you are able and sing with me? First speak our words of covenant, followed by the hymn number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath. Goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
I have the opinion that the minister of the church is not just a minister to the grown-ups. There are some ministers who think that their only job is to relate to the grown-ups and forget that there are kids in the church. I actually assume that the children who are here are a part of our community. And so I'm here to talk to the kids, and the grown-ups can simply listen in. One of the things that we are about as Unitarian Universalists, people of this church and our faith, is we are welcoming people. We welcome people of all kinds, and we want everyone to feel as if they belong here. What that means is that when we're in the church or church school, that we don't make fun of each other. We don't allow bullying. We don't have put-downs. Do any of you know what a put-down is? No. Well, when I was a boy, people would tease in fun ways that they thought might make me feel included, like, ah ha ha ha, your hair is curly. It used to be curly. Or they would say, oh, Smeller Eller. They would rhyme my name, and it was not nice. Sometimes when we want to be playful, we say, oh, you're so big, and if you're overweight, that can be painful. And so what I want to say is in our church, put-downs are not okay, because some people are big and some people are small. Some people are tall and some people are short. Some people are fast and some people are slow, and all people are welcome here, and we don't use put-downs. We simply say, hey, Sally, hey, Bobby, we're glad you're here. Thanks for coming. And so I share that because it's about all of us, and it's about our children and how we want you to treat one another in our church school. Thank you for being here, and now we'll sing our children out to their classes.
Good morning. My name is Angela Allard. I'm a member of the Social Responsibility Board. That's kind of the overall umbrella for all of the social justice work here at All Souls. And one of our teams is the More Squared team, the Metropolitan Organization for Racial and Economic Equity, More Squared. And we're lucky to have Reverend Eller here today because he was one of the founders of More Squared. How many years ago? 12? 15? Something like that. As a member of this congregation, you all are members of More Squared. And I'd like to invite you today to get involved with our More Squared team here at All Souls. The offering today will be going towards the work of our core team and our membership in More Squared. Currently, with More Squared, we have teams working on improving our public education system, on healthcare, immigration, that's the piece that I work on because that's my life, and workers' rights and criminal justice. We also have 9 interns working with us this summer on housing discrimination issues and voter engagement. So it's exciting work, and we'd love to have any of you get involved. Look for me or Lon Swearingen after the service today if you're interested. The offering today will go towards More Squared if you write that on your check, and any cash that's in the offering will go towards our work. I ask that you say yes to supporting More Squared today, yes to getting involved, and yes for working for justice with All Souls. Thank you.
Thank you. Now join with me, if you would, in the words of dedication for our offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create a just and compassionate society.
For Religion to be Significant by Mark Bellatini. For religion to be significant, it has to provide more than the comforts of community. It also has to provide opportunities for deepening, for spiritual growth, for the casting down of false stereotypes, which hurt us all. A good religion has to open us to the real diversity of our modern world, for our work as liberal religious people is not to be competitive with others, to find ways to supersede others, but rather to find ways to supersede ourselves, each and every one of us. Diversity must not end up being some sort of feel-good slogan, a word we keep in our hip pocket to make us feel like we're broad-minded. Diversity is a gift, but it cannot be a gift unless it is received. It is only received when there are hands and hearts open enough to receive it. The opening of fists into welcoming hands and welcoming hearts is our deep and important work. It's easy to welcome someone with whom you agree, and harder still is welcoming someone with whom you disagree. Yet this is the call and the work of diversity and true liberal religion.
An unlikely friend. I preached a strong sermon against the war in Vietnam. For 5 years, I had opposed the conflict, speaking at demonstrations, organizing a draft counseling service, and founding an underground railroad for deserters. My feelings ran deep, and the sermon was strong. Suddenly, a voice in the back of the sanctuary asked to respond to my remarks when I finished. It was Carlton Burr, a graduate of Harvard University, an officer in the Navy during World War II, a distinguished businessman and a conservative member of the Republican Party. I invited him to speak from our pulpit. We were two different people in our birth, our education, our politics, and almost everything about our life experiences. Yet, we had been friends from the very beginning of my ministry. He was warm and generous. He was open and direct. He was honest and dedicated. And unlike some progressives, Carlton would never abandon the church, even if he stood alone on every issue. He was a Unitarian Universalist of the finest tradition. And so he appeared in the pulpit with a short rebuttal. He defended the policies in Vietnam. He exonerated the then president and the military. And he claimed that his beloved minister was simply mistaken. And I was proud of Carlton, even as I thought of the misery and destruction of the war. And was this so wrong? Real love and friendship, I say, can and often does transcend our differences. For a time of meditation, which I remind you is simply the single focusing for a few moments of your thought as we enter into silence, I invite you to share in the silence, and if you're willing to focus on the issue of an unlikely friend. If someone was to see you as someone who was different than you, an unlikely friend, who might that be as you think of your circle of friends and acquaintances? Who is your unlikely friend with whom you might differ in culture or perspective or politics or belief? Think about that relationship and what it means to you, when it's strained and when it works, what it gives you and what it doesn't. Or maybe it's a family member, and we're really good at having strained relations with family members. Or maybe it's a member of the congregation or a former member. Hold that person and that relationship in your heart and be thankful for what it gives you. And during our reflection, think about what that has meant and might mean to you still. Let us share now a few moments of silence. For these and many gifts we give thanks. Diversity. Diversity in our lives, in our culture, and in our congregation. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance once you're there. Unitarian Universalism historically has been defined by these words: freedom, reason, and tolerance. Freedom, reason, and tolerance since probably early in the 20th century. We, in part, have come to foster religious tolerance and reason and freedom because we have fought against bigotry and hate and misunderstanding. For some, these values are central to who we are. For most of us, they may be understood in different languages and different faiths. Things like valuing a loving God who loves all people and every one of us, fostering that creativity that is a part of the universe and a part of each of us. Different language, similar sentiment. Our profound support for religious freedom may in part have been a result of having seen religious persecution for different kinds of beliefs or different styles of living or different ways of being in the world. I think back in the early part of our denomination's history, there was a man named Michael Servetus. How many of you know Michael Servetus? Oh, yeah. I'm preaching to the knowledgeable, if not the choir here. Michael Servetus was burned at the cross for opposing John Calvin's insistence on the Trinity, saying that the Trinity was not scriptural, and challenging John Calvin to chapter and verse on the scripture and outdoing him in public. Embarrassing him in public was probably the real crime. And he was burned at the stake for his beliefs. For many here in this congregation, the idea of religious prejudice or bigotry or even hate is not distant but familiar. It's not unusual for members of a Unitarian Universalist congregation to encounter conservative members of their family who don't understand why we are Unitarian Universalists. Not only don't understand, but may condemn us. Lord, in those churches, they even have atheists. Gee, that's no kind of church. It's an intellectual debating society. Lord, they even let witches and pagans in there. You won't believe what all can happen in those kind of churches. You're going to hell, and we're sure of it, unless you come to our way of believing. Any of you know that story? That's what happens when it's on a familial or congregational basis. This morning I am thinking of members of my congregation that I served in Peoria, Illinois. I was, for 7 or 8 years, the minister there in the Universalist Unitarian Church of Peoria. I think of one of the members, a woman named Martha, her name, who grew up apostolic Christian, a somewhat conservative, leaning to fundamentalist and literalist faith. When she was 14, all 14-year-olds, instead of having a coming-of-age class, were asked to stand alone before the board of elders, who then cross-examined the young person on their faith and their appearance. Martha was a gangly, probably unattractive 14-year-old who, when she expressed her doubts about the fundamentalist style of Christian faith she sometimes heard in her congregation, was condemned for her doubt. And then they began to say to her that her skirt, by the way, which was simply to the knee and should have been below the knee, was provocative. The little bit of makeup she had was unchristian, and that she probably needed to reform her behavior and her beliefs. At that moment, she had one of those crystallizing realizations that this wasn't her church. And refused from that day forward to ever go again to that church, resisting her parents' insistence over and over again, and never again ever going to an apostolic church, or frankly any church, for fear that that sort of bigotry and reprisal might be a part of the culture. Until she ran into Unitarian Universalism, where the way you dressed was not a big deal. Shirts or shorts or sleeveless, shirts or blouses, you name it, or beliefs, and she felt like she had finally come home. Or I think of Jo, a woman school teacher in the Peoria congregation, one of its leaders, who grew up Presbyterian. And in her probably middle school, Sunday school class, they were teaching about Scripture, Christian Scripture, and she amused out loud with the teacher. She said, I wonder, this Christ thing is pretty amazing. Was Jesus a man or a woman? Is it possible that Christ was a woman? That didn't go over real well in her Sunday school class. That is an inappropriate question. We'll have no kinds of questions like that in our church school. You'll sit in the corner facing the wall and never ask a question again in our class this church school year. From then on, she longed to ask questions, rejected her childhood church until she found a Unitarian Universalist congregation where she was told the question is in part the answer. And doubts are welcome. And Christ could have been a woman, she heard at one of our women's conferences, and felt like she had come home. When narrow-mindedness takes that kind of tack, then things like the bigotry we experienced with Martha or some of our extended families become possible. When it's on a societal level, it's things like the rise of Adolf Hitler, or the existence of the Ku Klux Klan, or internment camps, or Islamophobia, or institutionalized prejudice which can at a national or global level lead to genocide or horrors of human abuse and human atrocity. Our reaction to this kind of repression is to stand squarely for religious freedom and human dignity. We believe in diversity. We struggle for it. We want people to treat us like we hope we will treat them, and we hope to treat them like we hope they will treat us. We believe that God loves all people, some would say. We are not perfect in our practice of religious diversity. We try. Our denomination and our congregations are religiously welcoming. We welcome Hindus, and we welcome Baha'i, and we welcome Buddhists, and we welcome liberal Islam, but we struggle with believers and sometimes stumble over Christians. We are not perfect. We say that we welcome people and that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, and we try to be welcoming. And we're pretty good with gay and lesbian, and less successful with transgender and queer. And polyamory is a confounding reality that most all of us struggle with, and yet it is a part of our faith to welcome sexual minorities. We are not perfect at how we do it, but we want to practice inclusion and make tolerance in the broad sense a reality. Diversity is welcoming all kinds of people, and inclusion is about being willing to dance with them, whatever that dance might be. It's about seeking the truth in love. And I always thought that it was truth that was the issue and that love was the modifier, and I finally realized that truth is the modifier and love is the center, the truth that is in love. I like the David Rankin reading because I feel like it represents the best of us. It's too easy in Unitarian Universalist congregations to assume that we're all left-wing Democrats. And some congregations get really carried away with this, actually. And we have in common religious freedom, not a kind of democratic orthodoxy. And so I like the reading that David Rankin offers. It reminded me of another member of my congregation in Peoria, Illinois, a man named Phil Walls, who was a Caterpillar executive, upper-level Caterpillar executive. He had been in charge of the entire operation for Caterpillar tractor in South Africa and had been brought back to headquarters, which was in Peoria, Illinois. He was a dedicated Unitarian Universalist and loved our faith. And he was a moderate to conservative Republican. And he loved South Africa. He loved South Africa in the midst of apartheid. He brought magazines celebrating the culture of South Africa into a UU congregation that would get into great debates with him about the insanity of apartheid and the value of divestment. And he would say, it's investment, we need an engagement. Please join with me in investing in South Africa. Oh, God. He got on the board and he would take a conservative fiscal stand and insist that we actually live within our budgets. And he would be voted down in a board of 9, 8-1 over and over again. And he would say, you know, I'm really glad that we had that debate because see how you made a better decision because I caused you all this trouble. And he did. It would never have occurred to him, never would have occurred to him to leave that church because he got voted down almost every board meeting. It never would have occurred to him to leave that church because his minister thought apartheid was immoral and an abomination. While he defended the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela, I found it abhorrent. And yet he was one of my favorite church members. When his wife had bypass surgery, the congregation lined up to bring casseroles. When I was leaving that congregation to move to a church in Tulsa, and I invited the congregation to help load my U-Haul truck, the first person there was Phil. And it was a day like this week's going to be here. It was summer, it was humid, it was the Midwest, and it was going to be in the mid-90s. And the last person to leave when we closed the truck gate was Phil. We disagreed about apartheid, but we believed in our faith, which we had in common, which is that we may not believe alike, but we can still love alike, and that we have differences of politics and even belief, and that it matters that we still care and share together. Our culture tends to believe in things that are user-friendly. Our computers are user-friendly. Our phones are user-friendly. But you know what, folks? Human beings are not particularly user-friendly. Human beings rather resent being a means or being thought of as an expedient. And when we treat each other that way, we generally are met with resistance. Too easily, we rush to judgment about each other, assuming each other's motives and assuming our way or the highway. So human is this tendency to quick judgment and expediency in relation to one another. And yet it's when we slow down and move past judgmentalism, or judgment even, to curiosity, that we begin to welcome ourselves and each other into the dance. This spring I was in Santa Barbara. For a part of my retirement, I decided I would become involved in the Retired Ministers and Partners Association of our denomination. The danger of being retired is they assume that you have extra time and want to volunteer. So the next thing, I was on the board, and God, you've got talent, maybe you should be the president. Oh God, okay. So I was the president of the Retired Ministers and Partners Association. But part of what that meant is that when we had a retreat in Santa Barbara, California, don't you know, love it, I got to help pick who the keynote speakers were. And so I picked a couple of my favorite colleagues, John Burens, past president of our denomination, who I adore and think is utterly brilliant, and Carolyn Owenthal, who was a San Diego minister for many, many years. Well, John got up to talk about transcendentalist history, and he was just scintillating, and he talked about the value of sauntering, walking in companionship with others, that in that slow movement you come to love life and share the journey with each other, both as metaphor and literal reality. He said, as he looked in the first row where Carolyn was sitting, like you, Carolyn, who ran against me for president of the UUA, and were a worthy adversary and have been my constant companion, and because of our differences, I was a better president, and I claim you as my ally in the sauntering journey of our faith. I was deeply touched. I'd forgotten they'd run against each other. I had. After his talk, 2 women ministers came up to me and said, he made that too easy. There was difference. Heck, there wasn't difference, there was acrimony. We fought over who was going to be president, and he made it sound easy and forgiving, and I don't necessarily forgive him. Whoa, I'd forgotten they'd run against each other. Later that evening, Carolyn's talking. She does a magnificent job, as I expected her to do, and said nothing about John or their traveling together or their competing for president of the UUA. At the end of her talk, another couple of ministers came up to me and thanked me for modeling differences and reconciliation. In a country that's increasingly divided between the left and the right, the blue and the red, you modeled people who had been adversaries becoming allies and journeying together on the path. Thank you, Jim, for modeling the behavior we as a country need to be exhibiting. It's like, I wish I'd been so thoughtful. I had absolutely no intention of doing that. But once lifted up, I thought, well, damn. Grace abounds, and sometimes I'm smarter than I think. And in fact, John and Carolyn, by their compassion and their dignity and their solidarity to our faith, our commitments shared did demonstrate that in the midst of a country increasingly polarized, we can have difference and reconciliation. And I was so proud of them. We live in a post-Obama world. Barack Obama was in part elected by the Rainbow Coalition. Trump espouses the doing away with political correctness. He exhibits policies of Islamophobia. Pivotal to his administration is Steve Bannon, who during his Breitbart publication years advocated white supremacy. We live in a time of increased polarization and dehumanization, and it is a problem for our culture and our country. And some of us, some of my friends on Facebook, refer to our current president as the Cheeto. Or some of them simply say 45 because they don't want to acknowledge anything more than a number. And what I believe is that that's a form of dehumanization and indignity in relation to the office. I am not on script and probably dangerous to say. Our current president is to presidency what the National Enquirer is to journalism. But that doesn't excuse our dehumanizing him or denigrating the office. We can and need to be better than that. It's about loving the people with whom we disagree and insisting on their dignity when they refuse to exhibit it. It elevates us and may yet elevate them. We do not need to believe alike to love alike, and the point is to love alike, said Francis David, a Unitarian Universalist prophet in 1520. And now I want to make it a little bit more contemporary. I went to the General Assembly of our denomination in New Orleans this June. I didn't want to go. I did not want to go. I said to a colleague that I didn't want to go so badly it was hard to imagine I was actually going to get there. And he said, given a choice between having a root canal at the dentist and going to GA, I would choose the root canal. Said a minister of stature in our denomination, large church minister of long years standing. I felt the same way, and in part because our president, Peter Morales, had resigned. Harlan Limpert, our chief operating officer of enormous talent, past vice president of Target Industries, remarkable human being, had resigned. Scott Taylor had resigned. Our president of our UU Ministers Association, Don Southworth, had resigned, in part over accusations of unconscious racism and actions that represented probably white supremacy institutionally and historically. It was an incredibly difficult accusation, and I expected horror and acrimony at GA. We appointed 3 people to be an interim team, all 3 African American, including Bill Singford, who I think was one of our finest UU presidents, Sophia Betancourt, a Star King professor, and I'm going to lose the third name, I'm sorry. They came and they gave us hope. They said, by the way, we are assessing our denomination's capacity to take on institutional racism and move to equity and justice. The board supported their move, has put $5 million aside to work on reparations to include African American leadership in our denomination. Where I was afraid to go to GA, I was inspired. Where I had despair in the face of our failings, I admit our failings and think that racial assessment and reworking our work of justice is pivotal to our faith and consistent with the issues of inherent worth and dignity of which we say we care the most. We keep trying to include people and forget to dance with them. And I tell you, the dance of the diversity is the dance. We sing the song, let's dance the dance. It is a new day, and we begin again in love. Let's choose it. We begin again in love.
And now please rise as you're able and sing hymn number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Please be seated. Closing words should be a blessing. This is a great congregation, and you just rock. In case you didn't know, sometimes you forget. Sometimes you forget, but you guys are the best. I have never not loved you. When we think of a dance, how many of you learned to ballroom dance when you were in middle school? Now, I remember that occasionally I would step on my partner's feet. I was a little clumsy in middle school days. Any of you ever had someone step on your foot while you were dancing? It happens. The dance of inclusion, we assume that no one will ever step on our toes, or else. Come on now. You don't learn to dance without stepping on someone's foot occasionally, or saying it wrong, or doing it wrong. And so we begin again in love and dance anyway, or we don't dance. And I tell you, it is about the dance.